Welcome to our History channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Hit the like button and share this episode with a fellow history lover. Tonight's episode covers a part of the country that is dear to our hearts, Lincoln County, New Mexico. A region so rich with history and natural beauty, it continues to enchant the imaginations of all who come in contact with it. This summer, deadly fires engulfed the region, costing many residents their homes, their possessions, their beloved pets, and sadly for some, even their lives. As they rebuild their community and navigate the destructive flooding that has come to pass due to the fire's broad burn scars, we invite you to join us in donating to relief efforts. For those interested, the link will be in the description of this video below. Thank you. And now, on to tonight's episode. Fort Sumner, Lincoln County, New Mexico, July 14, 1881, William Bonney, more famously known as Billy the Kid, 3 months on the run after escaping the custody of Sheriff Pat Garrett, enters the dark and cold bedroom of Pete Maxwell. Billy the Kid had been hiding out here when Sheriff Garrett had finally got word of his whereabouts. In the darkened room, Billy was unable to recognize Garrett and called out in Spanish, "Quienes? Quienes? Or who is it? Who is it?" Unfortunately for Billy, the sheriff immediately recognized the kid's distinctive, pitchy voice, drew his gun, and fired off 2 quick rounds. The first round struck Billy, the kid, square in the chest, just above his heart. The second shot had missed. Nevertheless, the single bullet that had struck him was a mortal wound. Billy the Kid would die that night, bringing to a close 3 years of bloodshed that had ensnared the rural, mountainous region of southern New Mexico in what has come to be known as the Lincoln County War. The war, in many ways, is the perfect embodiment of the vicious, cutthroat, and covetous ways of the Old West. Billy the Kid, dead at just 21 years of age, who was a cowboy and ranch hand, a gambler and quick-drawing gunsman, as well as a part-time horse thief, would go down in history as one of the most notorious and polarizing figures in the West. The Kid, William Bonney, had been caught up in the throes of a conflict between 2 feuding business interests, a saga that has been glamorized in American cinema dating back nearly 100 years. John Wayne, Roy Rogers, James Coburn, Paul Newman, Chris Christopherson, and Val Kilmer have all played significant roles in films that brought the story to the silver screen and entrenched the narrative as a part of the American mythology that has a part of the American mythology come to be of the Old West. The crux of the dispute centered around the competing interests, looking to profit from the sale of dry goods and cattle in the county. The established business entity was led by James Dolan, who held a veritable monopoly on goods through his outlet known simply as the House. Dolan's faction also raised cattle, which were sold via lucrative federal government contracts to provide beef to the Army and Native American reservations. The arrival of 2 outsiders would serve to disrupt Dolan's cash flow empire and Dolan County's peace. Alexander McSween was a lawyer from Kansas, a territory that plagued him with poor health on account of his chronic asthma. A relocation to the Southwest was planned as a way to alleviate his symptoms. Having no destination in mind as they set out from the Sunflower State, word of Lincoln County came to them. Its high elevation, clear air, and scarce amount of lawyers piqued McSween's interest, and he arrived in the spring of 1875. The upstart community nestled within the Capitan, Sacramento, and Sierra Blanca Mountains would become the McSween's new home, and provide more excitement than they could have expected. Working as a lawyer, he defended clients for such crimes as cattle thievery, and would go on to handle many matters for John Chisholm. He would soon introduce a law partner to keep up with his flourishing business. His ambition unsatisfied, he believed the quality of goods being sold in the area was below what it was being passed off as, and he sought to use his legal expertise to contest the government contracts the house were arranged in, and to instead interject himself into that business whenever possible. Sween would find a partner that shared the same lofty ambitions in John Tunstall. Tunstall was the son of a man of considerable means. John Partridge Tunstall was a trader from Hackney, London, that had business interests in both Canada and the UK. His father would finance John's foray into business, and John planned to accumulate such wealth that he would elevate the Tunstalls from upper middle class to the highest levels of, quote, British polite society. In November of 1876, John H. Tunstall arrived in Lincoln, New Mexico. He had £6,000 that his father had proposed to place at his disposal for business ventures, north of $1 million in capital in today's money. Lawrence Murphy, his business associate James Dolan, and the Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady would soon square off with John Tunstall and Alexander M. Sween, giving the feud roots that went all the way back to the Old World, with Irish Catholics at odds with English Protestants. Tunstall intended to develop a cattle ranch, dry goods and supply store, as well as a bank in partnership with the lawyer M. Sween and cattleman John Chisholm. While the two entities were at odds with one another over business interests, the event that would elevate the antagonism amongst the parties revolved around the disbursement of an insurance claim. Emil Fritz had a $10,000 life insurance policy, and upon his death in 1874, the executor of his will hired Alexander McSween to collect on the policy. Once McSween had procured the funds, he refused to pay out the claim to the estate, because he had knowledge that Fritz was heavily in debt to the house, the Dolan Murphy-led store. McSween knew that due to significant lending, the house was in desperate need of the capital. Though M. Sween knew their claim to the funds was illegitimate, he intended to withhold the funds for as long as possible to harm his competition. M. Sween had traveled to St. Louis and then on to New York in the fall of 1876 to secure the funds from the insurance company. The carrier had gone bankrupt, but through significant legal wrangling and other pressures, M. Sween had still managed to successfully procure the funds. It would cost him nearly $3,000 in fees and payouts to subcontracted firms. But on August 1, 1877, M. Sween had been notified his account was accredited with a deposit of $7,148. Just after M. Sween received the funds, J. Dolan set up a claim for the entirety of the settlement. That December, M. Sween and his wife left Lincoln County on a trip they had planned for St. Louis. Dolan took this opportunity to attempt to take custody of the settlement. Dolan made his way down the mountain to Las Cruces, where he called upon Mrs. Scolan, who struggled with literacy, and imputed her to sign an affidavit that she believed M. Sween had permanently departed the county. Dolan brought the affidavit to District Attorney W. L. Reinerson as a pretense to arrest M. Sween on embezzlement charges. On Christmas Eve in Las Vegas, New Mexico, the San Miguel County Sheriff detained both M. Sween and Chisholm. After 48 hours, in a holding cell without any warrants arriving in San Miguel County, M. Sween convinced the sheriff to release them. As M. Sween, his wife, and John Chisholm made their way north to Trinidad, Colorado, they were scarcely a mile into their journey when the sheriff and a posse overtook their coach. Exhibiting excessive force, they drew Chisholm and M. Sween out of the carriage and intended to leave Mrs. M. Sween on the roadside alone, without any protection or anyone to drive her on. The quick-thinking Chisholm persuaded a young Mexican man nearby to drive her back to the Wagoner Hotel. M. Sween was quickly able to settle his case, but Chisholm would be confined in Las Vegas for 8 weeks. The legal wrangling between sides continued over the next 2 months, with M. Sween publishing a lengthy letter detailing the intimate details of the dispute in the Echo del Rio Grande, a Las Cruces newspaper. M. Sween was then subjected to examination of the matter, which was held on February 2nd. The defendant Emsuin was facing a hostile district attorney and judge, and ultimately Emsuin's bail was placed at $8,000, a sum curiously familiar to the insurance payout he had received. Emsuin was then taken back to Lincoln to be turned over to the sheriff. James Dolan would approach John Tunstall while he was at camp with Emsuin's allied party. Just before breakfast, Dolan threw his Winchester carbine down upon Tunstall and demanded a fight. Tunstall, confused, replied, "Do you want me to fight a duel?" Dolan snarled back, "You damned coward! I want you to fight and settle our difficulties." The men were then separated, and Dolan called back to Tunstall as he left, "You won't fight this morning, you damned coward, but I'll get you soon." Both Tunstall and Dolan would publish letters in the Independent out of Las Cruces. While Tunstall's letter had stoked the fires of the rivalry by airing grievances on behalf of himself and Emsuin, Dolan's had exposed weaknesses within his firm's case. In February, a court order was obtained to seize all of Emsuin's assets. The order had in error included all of John Tunstall's assets as well, roping him into this affair even further. Dolan, with little patience to begin with, hastened to move upon both Emsuin and Tunstall. He did so in part by enlisting members of the John Kinney Gang, the Jesse Evans Gang, and even the Seven Rivers Warriors. Their directive was to harass and rustle cattle from Tunstall's and Chisholm's ranches. They would also serve as hired guns for the dispute that was about to become exceedingly violent. Sheriff Brady celebrated the judgment against Emsuin, stating that he would never let him out of jail, and joked about the ground Mexican corn he had contracted to provide the gruel for his new prisoner's meal. Brady wasted little time in gathering his deputies to levy Emsuin's property in accordance with his death. The order called for only $8,000 of property to be attached, but Brady relished going through Emsuin's house and adding, besides the home itself, the furniture and other valuables, before riding on to Tunstall's store. Altogether, Brady had attached property nearing $40,000 in value. Tunstall, who had been out of town during this, grew apoplectic upon learning of the sheriff's actions. He maintained the debt was that of only Emsuin's, and his property should not be commandeered on his partner's behalf. Tensions rose until on the 18th of February. Sheriff Brady's posse caught up with Tunstall, who was with his ranch hands, Dick Brewer, Billy the Kid, and several others. They'd been herding his last 9 horses back to Lincoln. The official account, given by Sheriff Brady, of what happened next went as follows. "I increased his posse to about 24 of the best citizens procurable, and again sent him to enforce the attachment, which he did, except as to the horse herd, which they attempted to run off. And while a portion of the posse were in pursuit of the party, John Tunstall fired on the posse, and in return fire he was shot and killed. John Tunstall was dead, and none of his ranch hands managed to clearly witness the events that had occurred. This lack of a direct eyewitness account allowed for a significant amount of confusion to surround the deadly affair. Frank Warner Angel, a special investigator for the Secretary of the Interior, conducted an investigation on the event 5 months later. Through affidavits of members of both parties, he determined it was a small detachment of the posse that had gone forward and engaged with Tunstall. Members of the posse claimed that Tunstall had drawn his pistol. Angel, however, concluded that Tunstall had been killed, quote, in cold blood by Jesse Evans, William Morton, and Tom Hill. Tunstall's ranch hands, including Billy the Kid, Dick Brewer, and Frank McNabb, along with a collection of angered citizens, formed a group known as the Regulators to avenge the murder. The men were deputized by the Lincoln County Justice of the Peace. With Tunstall's blood being shed and the forming of the Regulators, the hostile feud over the Fritz insurance policy had given birth to the Lincoln County War, and there would be far greater violence in store for the burgeoning mountain community. But the shootouts, massacres, and battles to come in the now hot Lincoln County War are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the Join button below. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.